getting back to live formats. In fact, we're looking at doing some live business owner forums maybe this fall. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to do our virtual business owner interviews. The format is that we do one every other month, and typically we will invite various board members to interview one of their business owners who has had a transition or is in the process of a transition or something like that. So this morning we have Mike Crawford and Danny Connors from Entrust Wealth Advisors, and they have kindly invited one of their clients, Jonathan, whose last name will remain anonymous. We were going to put a mask on him, but he refused. So anyway, so Mike is on our board here in San Diego, and Danny is Mike's partner. Gosh, you guys, we have known these guys for quite a few years, have a wonderful practice here locally in San Diego, and good friends of our firms. So with that, I'm going to let you guys introduce Jonathan and take it from there. Thank you again for doing this. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you, Shelley. So I'm Mike Crawford. As Shelley mentioned, this is Dan Connors. We're the two partners at Entrust Wealth Advisors here in San Diego, which is a multifamily office. We've got about 80 families that we take care of, and we do everything for them that touches money. And with us today is our good friend and longtime client, Jonathan. So one of the things that we help people with in their lives is various transitions, and a common transition that we run into is when somebody is selling a business. And so what we try and do, of course, is efficiently and smartly, in a tax smart way, transition the business and figure out what they're going to do for the rest of their lives. Usually this is called retirement, but you were retired for about 10 minutes, so that's not really applicable in this situation. But Jonathan, welcome, and thank you for doing this.
Thanks for inviting me in.
Yeah, of course. So Jonathan owned a group of radio stations and sold them a few years ago, and so we're just going to go through and get his story and see what comes up. So when did you start the company?
Started the company with my partner in 1991. We started off as a consulting company that was, two guys with backgrounds in big corporate America-owned radio stations, CBS and NBC. And there's a lot of background that goes into that, but I won't bore you with all the details. But essentially, in 1991, we went out, and it was during a time where there was a lot of distress happening in the economy, in the radio industry, and the lenders and investors to the radio industry. So we saw an opportunity to consult with them, to help them, but our primary goal was to eventually acquire radio stations. But we were two guys with not a lot of money, and our first goal was to go out and raise that capital. And we contracted with a PE firm in New York to back us in buying radio properties. And during that time, while we were looking for stations, we came across some clients who we were consulting with. One of them happened to be a bank syndicate. And what we did was we consulted this syndicate on a group of radio stations that was in their portfolio. They were two major banks. Actually, it was a bank and an insurance company. And they had lent a lot of money to this one operator. And during the start of the recession, they stopped paying them. So the repayments stopped. They weren't, they didn't know what they were really holding in terms of assets. And we came in and did a project for them. We looked at them, we visited them, we looked through their financials, we examined the facilities. And at the end of the day, we went back to them with a presentation that said, you have problems and you either have to get control of these stations or find a way to sell them. So after a couple months, they called us back, and we went and visited them in Chicago, and they made us an offer that we couldn't refuse. And the offer was they would take back the radio stations from the operator, and they wanted us to buy them from the bank. And we didn't have a whole lot of money. We said, well, we have this private equity firm that will back us. And what ended up happening was the lenders had a different idea. They wanted to become our partners and invest working capital back into the business. And the whole goal on their part was to not have to write down the debt, but to operate it out with a couple of experienced broadcasters and hopefully recoup some of the unrealized losses that they were facing. We're talking about $100 million. And Bob and I accepted the assignment, became 100% owners of the broadcast licenses in the company, in return for paying them back a lot of money through various debt instruments. It was a pretty complicated structure. So fast forward, we worked with them for almost 4 years, did a pretty good turnaround, ended up selling the radio stations for a fair amount of money, got the lenders pretty much repaid 100% on their original loan. And in return, we got the partners, Bob and I, got cash and one radio station. And this was in 1995, 1996 range. So we proceeded to operate the business. My background was in finance, administration, planning, some banking experience as well, and my partner was in charge of the products.
You had sold NBC, you had just come off selling a ton of radio stations for them, right?
Yes, we got out of the radio business. NBC got out of the radio business in 1988. So they got out, and I was part of the selling team, the transition team. And at the time, it was owned by General Electric. So I was 28 years old, and I got a world of experience through that process. Investment bankers, lawyers. I met a lot of great people, and who turned out to be resources for me when I, went out and started my own company.
Great. So you had, so now you had operated these. You got great experience doing the GE thing.
Right.
You got great experience operating the radio stations for 4 years, and now you have a little bit of money. You didn't have any before, but you got a little bit of money, and you own a radio station, and that's here in San Diego.
It was here in San Diego.
Okay, and so now you've got to grow that business and turn that into. So you've already gone through one transition, sort of a corporate, two transitions really, and now you've got your own business. Okay.
So still too young to retire.
Right.
With an asset in a major market in the United States, which was quite valuable, but it needed some things. One of them was it needed to relocate its transmitter. At the time that we got this asset, we thought, we'll move it, the transmitter, we'll probably keep it for a couple of years, and then we would have this gigantic windfall. Well, you know what they say about plans. So it took almost a decade to relocate this radio station's transmitting facility.
Because there was a pesky mountain in the way.
There was a little mountain.
There was no way you could just knock that down.
Yeah, it was like moving, it was almost a real estate play. It was like moving from East County, San Diego to the beach, right? The value with that successful move was exponential.
Right. And it took 10 years to do.
10 years, almost to the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when did you meet Danny?
So I met Danny when we first moved our families to San Diego in 1993. Our two children at the time were about the same ages as Dan's children. And our wives met on the beach in Del Mar, California. And it was probably within the first month that we moved out here, because we moved out here in July.
Yeah.
And it was sometime in August of 1993.
Okay, well, and when did you become a client?
So I was working with the firm, with a member, not a partner, but a member of the firm that Danny was involved with. And we got to talking and developed this relationship and friendship. And probably within a year, I had asked the advisor I was working with if I could move my account over to Danny.
So this is in the mid-90s.
Probably 1994, early 1995.
So you've been a client for 20, a long time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not only, not only a client, but a friend
Good
as
friend,
well.
sure,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the interests of the radio business is, of course, you're interacting with all these different people, and what do you have any good stories? I know you do, that's why I'm asking the question. So tell us about some of the interesting things that happened.
Well, I have a lot of good
Yeah.
stories. I mean, one of the reasons I was in the radio business, and it's, again, you never know which fork in the road to take when you get to it. So when I got out of college, I was either going to Wall Street or I was going back to get my MBA.
Mhm.
And I had an internship with Goldman Sachs. And a next door neighbor of mine who happened to be working for NBC at the time said, well, what are your goals? I said, well, I'll probably end up going back to school. He said, why don't you come work for me for a year? I know that you'll have fun and I'll teach you a lot. And I chose that fork in the road. So I went to work for NBC in, I guess it was 1985, and never went back to school.
Never went to
And
Goldman Sachs.
And never looked back, so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you ran into Sarah McLaughlin, or you?
So, yeah, I mean, one of the benefits of having a radio station or two radio stations in the market that you live in, you got to meet a lot of interesting people. So we were talking about this yesterday, great story, Sarah McLaughlin, who probably a lot of you have heard of and know, actually played in front of my partner and I and our families during one of the high holidays, the Jewish holidays. And she was literally sitting at a baby grand piano with me, about 4 feet away from her, and entertained us for about an hour. And she was playing a private listener concert for our radio station listeners. And that was one of my more memorable days with a very accomplished artist.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the other one we talked about yesterday.
Yeah, and the other one was we had this Brit come into town who's going to also do a private listener concert. And her name was Adele, and probably more of a household name now than Sarah McLaughlin.
Right.
But she came into our studios to do an interview with our morning show. And she came in with one of her bandmates, and I thought she was homeless. I mean, she was very disheveled in old ratty clothes, did her interview, and we had our conference room wired for music. So we brought her into the conference room and asked her to play a few songs for our staff. So she didn't even have a mic, it was all acoustic. She sits down, she starts singing. I turned to our program director at the time and I said, I think this woman has a future.
She's got a chance. She may be able to sell a few records, make a couple of bucks.
And this was right before she released her first album, it was Adele 19. It had not even hit the market yet. And, we know the end of that story.
Right.
Does that mean she was 19 years old? Isn't that how she does it?
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
She named all her CDs by the age that she was.
Did she stop at 40? Is that,
She went,
39?
and,
I don't think she's 40, is she? She's still
Oh, really?
pretty young. Yeah. Yeah.
around that.
Okay.
Yeah, it was 20-something years ago.
Wow. All right. Well, that's cool. That's awesome stuff. What about? Tell us about the sale process then. When you own the radio station,
Right.
You're hanging out with Adele, everything's good, and now all of a sudden you're starting to think of selling the business. What was that like? Why did you consider that? What's the story behind that?
So the radio business, which I loved every day, waking up to and going to work, went through two significant periods of time. One being the Great Depression in 2008 to 2010, where advertisers didn't have a lot of money. They were very budget conscious, and broadcast media is a pretty expensive way to get your brand name out. So there was this thing called digital audio media that was on the horizon. So, for example, Pandora, Spotify wasn't out yet, but ways to get audio that you didn't have to turn on your radio for. And that started to disrupt the broadcast business, both radio and television. And, my partner and I, after we sold our first group, we had no debt. We had all the financial flexibility in the world, and we operated a very successful business, but we saw digital media forcing prices in the industry down because advertisers were able to get their brands on a Pandora for almost nothing. And, we're charging $500, $600, $700 a spot for, a radio advertisement. So we knew this was not going to get any better. It was going to become even more challenging. But for our competitors who were, big consolidators with a lot of debt, private and public, they were in distress. And a lot of them were, forced into bankruptcies. And we looked at it and said, should we be a consolidator, or should we buy, or should we sell? And we were like, we weren't sure at the time. So what we ended up doing was just operating it and doing nothing. We got calls every so often, and a lot of it was predicated on, if you successfully move the transmitter, we'll pay you X.
Right.
But you have to accomplish that. And, again, we thought it would be done within 12 to 24 months, took a decade. By the time we ended up accomplishing the move, we were in the throes of the Depression,
Right.
the Great Recession.
Great timing.
Yeah, so buyers didn't have money to acquire us, so we operated out of it. And then as, we got a little bit older and we saw the business wasn't going to get any better, we didn't go out and market the company, but we started to have some unique buyers come to us. And they were making offers, and the first ones were not acceptable. Now, this is where, we used Danny for advice. I went to him and said, kind of, how much money do I need, to retire or, to, be comfortable for the rest of our lives? And, we had enough, but, I didn't want to have to worry about it. So the first few offers we rejected outright. And here I had a lot of experience in the deal world. And I was very confident in my ability to negotiate. But we also had advisors like Danny, and we had lawyers and CPAs looking at this stuff. So I was a big believer in that process. And then one buyer who was buying a lot of radio stations at the time, well-financed, came back to us with a counteroffer. And we said, you're there, let's get to the details. We negotiated it. And that's where I went back to Danny and said, okay, we got this number. We put the numbers into the model, the financial planning model. We stress tested it for market volatility and, sort of the asset allocation plan. And I became a big believer in that process. And that's what made me comfortable going forward, selling the business.
Right. So you sort of knew people are coming in with offers, and you were running a successful business. Everything was fine.
Right.
And so they sort of, you came to Danny and basically said, all right, what's the number I need to never have to worry about this again? You run all the models, you decide on a number, and then you take that and you go back and you're educated with that number when you're negotiating the sale of your business.
Right.
And now you've got a lot more power and confidence in what you need. Okay, so that's, Yeah, I mean, that's basically the goal of all of these things is to make you understand what it is that you actually need. What is your number? You know, and then you can sort of get to that number if you're fortunate enough with your business, and then you don't have to worry about that.
Yes.
Okay, that's perfect. And did you spend a lot of time? Do you guys talk about, you know, what you would do then? So okay, so now you sell the business, you've got this money. Like, are you going to ride your bike every day, or what are you going to do?
Well, I enjoy a lot of outdoor physical activities, but I also need to be mentally stimulated. So, you know, when you sell a business, it doesn't just sort of open up the opportunity to, you know, do whatever you want, because you really have to wind it down. So it took about a year to wind down a company that I had for over 20 years.
Right.
And I didn't really have the bandwidth to think about my next step. But
because you were sort of in your mid-50s, or
in my mid-50s,
pretty young.
Yeah, and you know, again, I still wanted to stay in the game at some level, and I think naturally you fall back on what you've done. So I entertained some opportunities from other broadcasters, and I realized that if I can't own it and control it, I probably don't want to be involved in it.
Yeah.
So it took a while. I mean, I was so emotionally attached to this business. Again, I had literally every day of my life doing something that I loved, which, you know, a lot of people don't get.
Lucky, yeah.
Very lucky. So after I kind of separated myself from that, I looked at some other businesses and fell into something else. And, you know, my goal was not to have to go to an office every day, to be able to work it from wherever I was, you know, in the country or the world via, you know, an internet connection. And I found it, and it's been very successful.
So now that you're doing that, do you still run these financial planning scenarios?
Yeah.
And what is?
So we probably, Danny and I sit down certainly every 6 months, and maybe more frequently if market conditions are changing.
Or if you're going to do something.
Yeah, or if I'm going to do something, if I'm going to acquire something, whether it's a vacation home asset or something like that. My first call is to him, and you know, the team runs my financial plan through through various scenarios. Yeah, exactly, and we go through it again. So it helps me sleep better at night.
Right, and you guys just did this. You had a purchase.
We bought a vacation home, and I think, you know, I was sitting there thinking, I'm probably too far over my skis. I shouldn't do this.
Literally.
Yeah, and then the first thing I did was, you know, I called them and said, here it is. This is what it's going to cost. This is what it's going to cost to renovate. Should I be doing this? So I lean a lot on them for advice and guidance.
All right. Well, what do you think? What do you think you know now about working with advisors and selling businesses and financial planning stuff that you wish you knew when you were 30? That's probably a 20-minute discussion.
No, it is. It's a great question. I think one of the things I would advise anyone who's starting a business or buying a business, think about your exit plan when you're buying it, and how you, whether it's a radio station or a product, whatever it is, where you fit in the competitive landscape, and think about who's going to be the likely acquirer of your company. And you don't do it to think, okay, I'm going to be out in a year or 5 years. You do it to think strategically how you put your product into the marketplace. And you use advisors to help you with that, because you don't know what you don't know, and you can't see certain things. That's why I always used outside consultants and advisors to help me with that, because an entrepreneur is really focused on running their business, not the whole strategic landscape. And that's where, you know, whether it's your financial advisor, your CPA, your attorney, whoever it is, or a group of them, They were on my strategic planning committee because, you know, I came from big corporate America. I got trained in the Jack Welch School, and I was a big disciple of this is what you use. This is a process that's successful.
Mm-hmm.
So I took that into small business, and you know, the only difference was we tried to treat our employees like partners and investors, which I didn't get at General Electric. So
Yeah.
you know,
Well, that's great advice, and actually, I just wrote that down. We talk about that all the time. Setting things up or design it with the end goal in mind.
Yep.
And so that's you know, that's always good to be reminded of that. So.
yes, our motto was win the game first and then go play.
Yeah. Good motto.
Yeah.
All right, Shelley. Well, that's about 23 minutes or so.
Yeah.
So just.
It's 8:28. We have about 2 more minutes. If you all have any questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat function, and we'll see if we can squeeze them in. In the meantime, Jonathan, you mentioned briefly that you are really emotionally attached to the business. You know, that's a thing that we as advisors have a hurdle to get over a lot of times. How did you get past that?
I think I looked at the environment that we were operating in, and even though I loved it, I was being very pragmatic about the future of the industry that I was, you know, operating in.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, again, you need to talk to people about that, because once you get entrenched in a business, especially 20 plus years of ownership,
yeah.
And, you know, step back, my kids didn't want to be in the business. So it wasn't something that I was planning on passing to them.
Yeah.
You know, my
Well,
oldest
family
worked
thing.
in the business 2 years, and she was a business school graduate, and, you know, came to me one day and said, I want to pursue my passion. I said, what's that? I want to be a nurse. You know, I mean, I'm very proud of her, but, you know, it was like, she's not going to take it. My 2 younger ones were not going to go into the business. So it takes a while to, you know, sort of separate yourself from that.
Yeah. Yeah. How many employees did you have?
How many?
Employees?
We had about 180.
Okay.
And then when we sold off the group, we were down to 40.
Gotcha.
So one station, 40 employees.
Okay. And that's usually difficult too. Did you keep the sell really confidential all the way up to the end? Or did you let them know?
That's a good question. So selling a broadcast station that's, you know, government controlled, the license, there's a 90 to 120-day process where it gets put out to the public for comment.
Oh, okay.
That's before you could even close on it and transfer the license. So you have to disclose. My employees needed to know about this. So we shared it with them. We also put stay-in-place bonuses in for every employee.
Oh, good.
So they were incentivized to be there on the last day of the, you know, that it closed.
Right.
And, you know, because, you know, you had a business that needed employees to run it. You know, whether I was being philanthropic or not, I needed them, and they knew that. So kept them on, incentivized them, and also helped find them new jobs after the deal closed.
Perfect. Perfect.
We do have a couple questions in the chat there.
Yeah. So question is, how much planning went into valuation and exit planning prior to getting the offers from the prospective buyers? Did you spend time ahead of time? And then did you look at different exit options prior to getting those offers instead of just an outright sell?
Yes. The answer is yes. So there were certain metrics by which stations were valued. One is a multiple of EBITDA, a cash flow multiple. The other is how many people the signal covered, and they applied it's called a POP, percentage of population dollar amount. So we looked at both those valuations. In terms of other options, I had an opportunity to partner with Richard Branson in Virgin because he wanted to bring the Virgin brand to the United States broadcast business. So we were going to be his first US-based Virgin radio station. So we looked at that opportunity very hard. And I probably spent a year with them, with his people. In fact, I kept the documents up until a couple of years ago because I actually retreated from that because I got a set of documents about Yay High from them. It was all regarding their branding, what you could do, what you can't do. And I looked at it and said, first of all, it probably cost me, I don't know how much money to have an attorney look at this. But if this is what I need to comply with, I'm not interested. I had enough of dealing with banks that had loan documents and covenants that I needed to, you know, abide by. I knew I was giving up control, and I just, you know, I'd rather sell it.
Made it too complicated. All right.
Yes.
Well, that's all the questions we have, and we are 3 minutes past our time. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. And I just want to say thank you again. Very interesting story. Love all your stories, and appreciate the time very much. Mike?
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Mike and Danny,
Yeah.
thank you. Appreciate it.
You got it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks
Thanks,
again.
Shelley.
Okay. Bye, Marcy. Bye, Tim.
Bye-bye.
Bye.